a rainy night in Seattle, USA. The streets were dark, illuminated only by scattered neon lights reflecting off the wet pavement. Eric Warner, a 32-year-old computer engineer, stood in front of the entrance to a hidden facility called Noah Labs. A few weeks ago, the company had contacted him, offering him a position on a top-secret project. The promise of a high salary, access to cutting-edge AI technology, and job security had made the offer seem perfect. But now, standing in front of the massive metal door, he had a strange feeling. Something was off. He placed his ID card against the scanner. A red light blinked for a second, then turned green. The heavy metal door groaned as it opened. Revealing a steel elevator waiting inside. Eric stepped in and pressed the only button on the control panel. B8. The elevator descended quickly, but something felt wrong. It was taking too long. 1 minute passed, then 2. A sense of unease crept into his chest. Suddenly, the lights flickered, and a soft voice played through the speakers. "Welcome to Noah Labs. Your entry has been approved." The doors slid open, and Eric stepped into a nightmare. Lab number 8 was a sleek, futuristic space. The walls were made of an unknown metal that reflected the dim lighting. A chemical odor lingered in the air. Digital screens on the walls displayed complex charts and data, most of which Eric couldn't decipher. A man in a white lab coat approached him, extending his hand. "Dr. Nelson, director of this sector. Welcome." Eric shook his hand and glanced around. The facility seemed quiet, but there was something unsettling in Dr. Nelson's eyes, as if he was hiding something. They led him to a room where a contract appeared on a digital screen in front of him. "Before we start, you need to sign this. Just security protocols. Standard procedure." Eric skimmed through the long legal document, but one clause at the end caught his attention. "By signing this contract, you agree that you will not leave the facility until the mission is completed." Before he could react, the lights suddenly went out. A red emergency siren blared. From the distant hallways, gunfire and blood-curdling screams echoed. "Damn it! Not again!" Dr. Nelson muttered as he rushed to a control panel. Eric's heart pounded. "What the hell is happening?" Nelson shouted. "We need to get out." "The creature has escaped from quarantine." Just then, the sound of shattering glass echoed through the hall, and in the darkness, a pair of glowing eyes appeared. Eric quickly realized that the only way out was to pass through 8 security stages, each designed to prevent unauthorized access or escape. But now, they had become death traps. Stage 1. The burning hallway. The first door opened, revealing a narrow corridor. Suddenly, jets of fire erupted from the walls. Pressure sensors covered the floor, activating the flames at the slightest movement. Eric had only 10 seconds to cross. He took a deep breath, crouched low, and sprinted. The heat scorched his back, but at the last moment, he leaped through the doorway just as the flames roared behind him. Stage 2. The poisonous gas. Eric entered a room filled with a green, toxic mist. Dr. Nelson yanked out a small oxygen mask from his pocket. "Neurotoxin. If we don't leave in 45 seconds, our nervous systems will shut down." But the exit was locked behind a mathematical puzzle. Eric's mind raced as he analyzed the equations, his fingers trembling. Finally, at the last second, he hit the correct sequence, and the doors whooshed open. Stage 3. The creature in the dark. The next hallway was pitch black. Only the sound of heavy breathing filled the silence. Suddenly, emergency red lights flickered on, revealing a massive, inhuman creature with jet-black skin and razor-sharp teeth. "Don't look into its eyes. It detects movement through your breathing," Nelson whispered. Eric held his breath, moving silently toward the exit, but the slightest noise made the creature turn its head. Thinking quickly, he grabbed a piece of metal from the floor and threw it across the room. The creature lunged at the noise. In that split second, Eric and Nelson dashed to the door, sealing it shut behind them. Stages 4 to 8, the drop, the minefield, the electric chamber, and the zero-gravity tunnel. Each stage became more terrifying. In Stage 4, they had to cross a suspended bridge that could collapse at any moment. Stage 5 forced them to navigate a minefield where every step could be their last. Stage 6 was a tunnel lined with electric wires, and Stage 7 was a zero-gravity zone where even the slightest movement could send them into an endless void. Stage 8, the final choice. Finally, they reached the exit door, but there was a problem. Only one person could leave. The security system wouldn't allow two people to exit together. Dr. Nelson pulled out a gun. "I'm sorry, Eric. Only one of us is getting out of here." Eric's heart raced. His mind calculated his only option. A deep roar echoed from the distant corridors. The creature was still alive and getting closer. Suddenly, Eric smirked. "Fine, you go." Nelson hesitated, then slowly approached the scanner. He placed his ID card on it. Beep. Green light. Door unlocked. At that exact moment, Eric lunged forward and tackled Nelson. The doctor stumbled backward, right as the creature burst through the hallway. Nelson screamed, but before he could react, the beast ripped into him with its claws. Blood splattered across the walls. Eric grabbed Nelson's ID card, sprinted through the door, and slammed it shut behind him. Eric emerged through an emergency tunnel, stepping into the cold morning air. He found himself in a remote forest on the outskirts of Seattle. The sun was rising. He took a deep breath, relieved to have escaped. But then, when he looked at his hand, his blood ran cold. A strange black wound had formed on his skin. It pulsed with dark purple veins, almost as if something was alive beneath it. Eric's breath hitched. "Am I infected?" Eric held his breath. He stared at the strange wound on his hand, watching as the black and purple veins pulsed beneath his skin. He could feel something growing inside him, like a force he had no control over. His heart raced, and he instinctively clenched his fist, hoping the feeling would pass. But it didn't. He couldn't stay here. He was in the middle of nowhere, torn shoes and covered in blood. The images of the hellish escape still haunted his mind. His mind was clouded with thoughts of the experiments, the creature, and the fact that he had just witnessed the death of Dr. Nelson. "I need to contact someone. I need to find answers." Eric started walking, his body still trembling from the adrenaline and fear. But after a few steps, something else happened. A strange tingling sensation spread across his body. His vision blurred for a moment. The world around him shifted. Colors seemed more vibrant, and his hearing intensified. He could hear every beat of his heart, every distant rustle of leaves. He could feel the heat of the sun on his skin more intensely than ever. And then he heard a voice inside his mind. You're not just a human anymore." Eric froze. He didn't recognize the voice. It wasn't his own thoughts. It was something else, something outside him. "What the hell is happening to me?" he whispered to himself, trying to suppress the rising panic. But the changes didn't stop. They intensified. He was becoming something else, something unnatural. Eric continued walking through the forest, trying to focus on finding a way out. His mind was in chaos. The more he focused on the strange sensations in his body, the stronger they became. He could sense things, hear things that weren't normal. Then he heard it. The sound of engine roars in the distance, faint but getting louder. He instinctively knew it was not a random vehicle. These were specialized hunters, the cleanup squad sent by Noah Labs. They were after him. Eric quickly ducked behind a thick tree and glanced around. Through the trees, he saw red lights flashing from their vehicles, searchlights sweeping the area. He knew they were armed, trained to track down and neutralize targets like him. And they had already been notified that he was infected, that he was no longer just a regular human. He glanced down at his hand, the strange black wound still pulsating. If they found him, they wouldn't hesitate to terminate him. The company wouldn't care that he was once a regular man. They'd see him as a dangerous experiment gone wrong. "I can't let them catch me," he thought. He began moving through the forest as quietly as possible. But the ground beneath him seemed to make the smallest sound with every step, and the hunters were closing in. At that moment, Eric's mind snapped. Something primitive stirred inside him, a surge of power. He was no longer just running for his life. He was ready to fight back. His senses sharpened. He could hear every breath the hunters took. He could feel their movements, anticipate their next step. He was becoming something else, something dangerous. He darted forward, sprinting with unbelievable speed, his feet barely touching the ground as he moved past the hunters, undetected. Eric's heart was pounding as he sprinted deeper into the woods. His enhanced senses were a double-edged sword. He could sense danger before it arrived, but it also made him more aware of the terrifying power growing inside him. He didn't know what was happening to him, but he had to escape. He could feel the hunters closing in. They weren't far behind. He needed to make a decision. Would he fight or flee? A loud voice echoed from the distance. "Target acquired. Fire!" In an instant, the hunters opened fire. Bullets whizzed past him, but Eric, in a split second, could see the bullets' trajectories. He dodged with unbelievable speed, narrowly avoiding them. But just as he was about to make a break for it, one of the hunters caught sight of him and pulled out an electroshock gun. When Eric finally opened his eyes, he was in another cold, sterile room. He tried to move, but his hands were bound by metal cuffs. He looked around, but everything was blurry. His mind was foggy, and his body felt like lead. Then he saw him, Dr. Nelson. But how was that possible? He had seen him die. He had watched as the creature ripped him apart. Nelson stood behind a glass partition, smiling. "You're finally awake, Subject 8. How does it feel to be one of us now?" Eric's heart raced. What had happened to him? Nelson continued, his voice dripping with cold amusement. "You've been upgraded. You're no longer human. You're the weapon we've been waiting for. A new phase in our experiment. And now, you will do as we say." Eric tried to move, but the restraints held him tight. You can't control me, Eric growled, his voice barely a whisper. Nelson laughed. You have no choice. Welcome to your new life, Eric. You're going to help us change the world, whether you want to or not. Eric looked at his hands, still trembling, the strange black wound still visible. His body was changing, but he wasn't sure into what. He clenched his fists. I won't let you control me. I will escape, even if I have to burn this place to the ground.